Could you forgive someone who abandoned you with a text message at the moment you needed them most? Queens, New York. Suzan, 40, sits on the living room floor, staring at her phone screen with tear-filled eyes. The message still glows. Sorry, it's over. I need to move on. Roger. Across the city, he's in a penthouse, wearing an expensive suit, a glass of wine in hand. The silence after that message was deafening. No argument, no face-to-face goodbye. After nearly 20 years of marriage, he hit send and turned the page on his own story, as if everything they'd lived through was just a disposable preface to the life he finally believed he deserved. Roger and Suzan had faced the impossible together. They slept on park benches, shared a single sandwich for 2 days. They were invisible in the city that never sleeps, dragging bags like shields against the world. But not once in those days did Suzan let go of his hand. Not when the cold burned, not when people looked away. She believed, with an almost childlike faith, that love would survive anything. And it did, until the money came. It was like a magic trick, a contract, an idea, a startup that exploded. In months, Roger went from homeless to millionaire, and with the fortune came vanity, the parties, the glances from other women, the temptations of a life he'd only ever seen through shop windows, and then the decision to abandon everything that reminded him of poverty, including Suzan. And that's how she found out she was alone, with a cold text. No explanations, no chance to ask why. Suzan stayed in that same small Queens apartment. The only difference now, besides the overdue electric bill, was a pain too vast to measure. But time doesn't heal. It transforms. Sometimes pain turns into strength. Sometimes resentment turns into fire. And Suzan, the invisible woman Roger left behind, was about to discover what she was made of. If you've ever been abandoned when you believed most, if you know the feeling of being forgotten by someone you helped lift up, then subscribe to the channel and hit the like button now, because this story will move you from start to finish. Because the world turns, and those who discard you today might knock on your door tomorrow, begging for help. What made Roger come back years later, pleading for aid? No one could have predicted, not even Suzan. That first night, Suzan didn't cry. Her body was still in shock. She stared at the walls as if waiting for Roger to appear, open the door, say it was a mistake. But minutes turned into hours, into days, and reality crept in slowly, like New York's February cold, first chilling, then unbearable. The man she'd saved so many times, whom she'd wrapped in her own blankets when he shivered with fever on the street, now slept on Egyptian cotton and wanted nothing to do with her. She tried to move on, but something inside had shattered. It wasn't just her heart, it was her faith in promises, in partnership, in justice. Suzan looked in the mirror and didn't recognize herself. Time showed in her face. Her eyes seemed too tired for her 40 years. She started missing shifts as a nighttime caregiver for the elderly. Her mind was foggy, her body heavy, the bills piling up on the fridge like reminders of her loneliness. Then came unemployment. Savings ran dry. The pantry turned to dust. Friends began to drift away. No one wanted to deal with the sadness she radiated. No one knew how to help a woman who'd given everything and was left with nothing. Suzan wandered Queen's streets like a shadow. She slept poorly, cried in secret in the public library bathroom where she went to search for jobs that never came. Her stomach ached, her chest ached more. It was an emptiness no advice or time could fill. And unlike Roger, she had no one to lift her up. She was alone, forgotten, like a painting turned to the wall, like a song no one plays anymore. But within the pain, a tiny flame still insisted on burning. She remembered the promises they made in the cold, the ideas they sketched on a torn napkin when they were homeless. One day we'll win together, he'd said. One day they'll know us for what we're capable of creating. But now he'd won alone, and her, she had only memories. And yet, instead of erasing that past, Suzan kept it all. The letters, the photos, the promises. She didn't want to forget. She wanted to transform. Because in the midst of pain, a decision is born that changes everything. Suzan was about to do something even she wouldn't believe, something that would spark a brutal, silent, and inevitable transformation. It was an ordinary early morning. No grand event, no applause, no one watching. Suzan woke from a nightmare, heart racing, throat dry. In her dark apartment's silence, she saw herself back on the street beside Roger like the old days. But this time he left her alone, vanished into the darkness, and she woke, sweating forgetting, alone in the present, which hurt more than the past. She sat on the floor, took a deep breath, and for the first time in ages, picked up that old notebook. In it were business ideas, product sketches, notes scribbled during sleepless nights and hungry days. Plans she and Roger dreamed up when they had nothing but each other. Suzan flipped through slowly, the yellowed pages, the crooked scribbles, and found a note in her own handwriting. If everything falls apart one day, start over with what you do best. She knew how to care for people. She knew how to listen. She knew how to turn pain into comfort. And there, in that cold early morning, Suzan had a spark. Not a glorious movie moment snap, but a small, almost shy impulse. She searched on her old phone for demand for independent caregivers, found forums, videos, platforms, and there began her reconstruction. In the days that followed, she walked the streets with her head a bit higher, handed out her own flyers. I'll care for your loved one with love and respect. The competition was tough. Many ignored her. Others smiled with pity. But one man, the first, called. Hesitant. He needed someone to care for his wife with Alzheimer's 3 times a week. He couldn't pay much, but it was something. Suzan smiled again. Small, discreet, like someone finding a flower growing through rubble. The pain was still there, but now there was purpose. With every bath given, every story heard from a lonely elder, she felt something inside her healing, not the abandonment, but the feeling of uselessness. She was becoming someone again. It wasn't easy. Sometimes she cried in the bathroom. Sometimes she came home with aching hands, unable to afford the subway. Sometimes she reread Roger's text and wondered where she went wrong. But even without knowing, she was climbing, inch by inch, alone, through grit, through heart. And what Suzan didn't yet know was that this small spark of quiet action was about to ignite a fire that would change the course of her story and many others' lives. It was there, between changing diapers and reheating dinners in microwaves, that Suzan planted, without knowing, the empire that would one day make even Roger come back. Begging, the first client, opened a door. And like any door, it led to others. The wife of the man she cared for recommended Suzan to her neighbor, the neighbor to her sister. Before she knew it, Suzan was caring for 4 different homes. Not just people, but memories. Stories that children didn't have time to hear, bodies aging in wait for affection. Suzan didn't offer a service. She offered humanity. She reinvested every dollar, bought a better phone, built a small website with a friend's help, created a social media profile called Heart in Hands. And there, something she never imagined was born, a brand, an identity, a mission to care for those no one else would, with the same love she once gave Roger, and now chose to give the world. Suzan slept less and learned more. Between shifts, she studied, discovered how to scale her business, created care packages, slowly hired other women with stories like hers, single mothers, immigrants, women society rendered invisible. She gave jobs to those no one else would hire, and built a business model based on empathy and trust. It wasn't all smooth. Some days, clients unfairly accused her. Some nights, the money didn't stretch. An employee stole from a client and Suzan nearly lost everything. She thought about giving up, abandoning the project, but she remembered the nights sleeping on the ground with Roger, swearing that if she ever got a chance, she'd do things differently. And she was. Recognition came first in the streets, then in the neighborhoods. A local paper ran a story about her project. Social media exploded. She was invited to give a short talk at a school. The audience gave a standing ovation, and for the first time, Suzan cried with gratitude. Slowly, Heart in Hands became a reference in New York. What was once a woman in worn flip-flops pounding Queens sidewalks was now a businesswoman with a team, structure, and purpose. Suzan didn't want revenge. She wanted freedom, and she was building it, brick by brick, love by love, work by work. And she had no idea that across the city, Roger, now a millionaire surrounded by luxury and fake friends, was beginning to learn what it means to lose everything. While Suzan rose in silence, Roger was starting to fall, fast, and only one person in the world could save him. 2 years had passed since that dark night alone, with the old notebook in her lap. Now, Suzan walked into corporate buildings in high heels with a steady gaze, her hair neatly tied, her eyes calm but intense. She spoke little, just enough. Those who heard her fell silent, not out of fear, but respect, because it was impossible not to feel the weight of her story, even if she didn't tell it. Heart in Hands had become a benchmark in compassionate care. Over 70 employees hired, branches in 3 boroughs, partnerships with hospitals, a social foundation created to train marginalized women. Suzan was invited to events, honored by NGOs, praised by politicians who once would have ignored her on the streets. She never forgot where she came from. She still walked through Queens, not with fear, but with reverence. The city that broke her now applauded her. She knew every shadow on the sidewalks, every smell of cheap food, every face of an abandoned woman. And it was exactly there, where it all began, that something astonishing happened. "Hello? Suzan, it's Roger." The voice that once destroyed everything was now weak, hesitant. He sounded different, hoarse, anxious, silent. She stopped walking. Her heart raced. The world seemed to freeze. I know you probably don't want to hear my voice." "You're right." Silence. "But I didn't know who else to call. I'm broke, Suzan. Betrayed by partners. Bad investments. I owe more than I have. And I'm sick." "What do you want from me, Roger?" Silence. He was crying. She hung up. She needed to breathe. Her body trembled. It was real. The man who abandoned her by text was now crying through the same device, but the world had turned, and now she was the one standing. Days later, he sought her out. In person, thin, worn, no expensive watch, no arrogance, just a broken man before the woman he thought he'd surpassed. Suzan listened, calmly, without bitterness, because inside her the pain no longer called the shots. She did. Roger begged for help, a job, advice, anything, said no one believed in him anymore. Suzan listened to it all, in silence, and when he finished, she said, "You abandoned me when I was invisible, and today the whole world sees me. Know why? Because I never needed to destroy you. I just needed to rebuild myself." She didn't hire him, but she didn't humiliate him either. She told him where he could seek help, gave him the name of a shelter, offered a meal, and walked away. She didn't need him to kneel. The real victory was looking into his eyes and feeling nothing, because when life breaks you, it's how you rebuild that defines who you really are. But the most powerful moment was still to come. Suzan was about to transform thousands of lives with a decision that would change everything. Again, Suzan stood before a packed auditorium. Young people, seniors, single mothers, ordinary folks with shining eyes. On the screen, the words, "You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to do next." Suzan lifts her eyes, takes a deep breath. She's about to tell her story, not out of vanity, but purpose, because now she understood. The pain that nearly killed her was exactly what the world needed to hear to keep from dying too. She speaks of her tough childhood, hunger on Queen's streets, the love between 2 broken souls, the cruelest betrayal. The moment she was reduced to a WhatsApp notification. But it doesn't end there, because Suzan's real story begins exactly when she was abandoned. And she talks about the invisible strength that lifted her, the silent reconstruction, the company born from pain, the jobs created, the lives touched. And then she reveals, "Today, with pride, I announce the creation of the Suzan Gray Foundation, an organization that will train and employ abandoned women, single mothers, victims of abuse and violence, so none of us ever have to beg for love where there's no respect." The audience erupts in applause. But she doesn't cry. She smiles. Because the cycle is complete. Because now other women will have the chance to start over. Because now pain has become purpose. Roger didn't return to the top, but he found his own path, far from the spotlight, trying to rebuild what he destroyed. Suzan doesn't hate him, she forgave him, not for him, but for her. Because true freedom begins when you let go of what hurt you and hold on to what strengthens you. Today, Suzan is more than a businesswoman. She's a symbol, a voice, a beacon for those still walking in darkness. And her story, which began on Queen's cold ground, now warms hearts across the country. She didn't just get rich with money. She got rich with courage, purpose, soul, and while many chase fame and power, she chases lives. So no one else is discarded by a text message. Because in the end, what defines you isn't who abandoned you or who doubted you. What defines you is who you choose to be, even when no one else believes. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever felt the pain of being left behind, or if you're fighting to rise again, subscribe to the channel. Here every video is a reminder. You can fall, you can be broken, you can be forgotten, but you are never alone. Leave your like. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the one who abandoned you might have been the push life gave you to soar.